Michael R. Jackson, composer and lyricist for A Strange Loop. Welcome to Cultural Attaché.
Thanks for having me.
So, A Strange Loop is going to open in Los Angeles a couple weeks after the fifth anniversary of the show first being performed. And I'm wondering, what has this musical that you've given the world taught you over the course of that 5 year journey? Which I know is a much longer journey because you've been working on it for 20 years.
Yeah, it's taught me that persistence is key and that um, as human beings, we have a lot more in common than we have uh, not in common. And that's been an interesting sort of lesson to learn each time I encounter the peace out in the world.
It's interesting you say that because immediately after seeing the show, friends who had come to town for my wedding, because I told you I saw this the week I got married, um, a white couple and their teenage daughter, I strongly encouraged that they go see A Strange Loop.
Mhm.
And I wasn't sure how they would respond to it. I mean, there's racy material in it, and I wasn't sure how comfortable they would be. And they all came out of it loving it because they saw themselves in Usher because everybody suffers those same inner demons, that self-sabotage. And I know that isn't 100% of what you want the show to do, but is that enough that people come at it from that point of view?
Well, the show is about a character who is exploring very explicitly his own sort of internal makeup. And I feel that when people watch it, they can't help but do that for themselves. And so it's an exploration of the self. He is a fat black gay man. And so that's the makeup that he has to work with. That's not what everybody else's makeup is necessarily, but they all have whatever their makeup is. And so I think watching someone sort of reckon with their own makeup, they can't help but reckon with their own. And that for me, more than anything, was what I sort of wanted.
And hopefully some empathy along the way for people who are not the same as we are.
Yeah, I mean, I think empathy for sure, but also recognition.
Absolutely. Now, you've obviously been talking to other journalists and television, you know, personalities about this show for 5 years. And I'm just wondering, is there a part of the conversations that you've had about A Strange Loop that haven't yet touched on what you most want people to understand about the show or that you most want to express about the show?
Oh gosh. I mean, people have asked me so many questions about it. I'm trying to think if there's anything they haven't asked me. Um, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I'm sure there's something, but yeah, it's been very widely covered.
Which is something you could never have predicted, I'm assuming.
Not at all. I never would have imagined.
Why do you think the show has resonated the way it is? Why do you think people are curious and want to talk to you and want to know more about you and about this show?
I think because the show is very uh has a is very open and very sort of truthful and honest, you know, sort of to its fault lines, and that it says things out loud that most people don't really talk about openly, except maybe with like an intimate friend or a therapist or something. And uh and I think that like it gives people permission to sort of wade into certain territory that they wouldn't ordinarily do in mixed company.
And yet they all end up on their feet at the end of the show.
Yeah, I think Usher's journey is a really interesting one where he's so miserable for so much of it, and yet by the end of it, there's a brief but I think amazing kind of a moment of self-acceptance. And I
Uh,
think that's a cool sort of change to watch.
It is, absolutely. And you've regularly been asked about how autobiographical this show is, and I love your response that it's emotionally autobiographical. Do you think
Yeah.
people finally understand that you are not Usher and Usher is not you?
No, I don't think people understand that at all. And I'll just keep telling them that until I'm dead in the grave and even beyond. I'll haunt them and I'll keep telling them it's not autobiographical, but there's still only people who won't believe me.
Why do you think that is? I mean, nobody thinks that Stephen Sondheim is Joanne and company.
Right. I mean, I think it's because there is so much about it that is personal. I mean, Usher is a, fat black gay man with a famous name who's writing a musical. I'm a fat black gay man with a famous name who's writing. I mean, it's there. I've never said that like it's I never said that it's not a personal piece or that I didn't draw from personal experience to write it. I just said it's not autobiographical because autobiographical to me, autobiography is a specific genre. It's a specific form. That's not what a strange loop is. It's something stranger, frankly. And I think it's important as much as you want to like make it be about me, Michael R. Jackson's life. It's just there's just too many ways in which it isn't that. If anything, it's a self-portrait. I mean, self, a self-portrait. It's an attempt to capture a kind of experience from the inside, something that I began when I was about 23 years old. I'm now 43 years old. So I'm literally not the same person. I don't have the same perspective on the world necessarily as I did as a 23-year-old who was trying to write a 20 something person's life experience. Do you see what I'm saying?
Of
Like
course.
it's a very peculiar artistic challenge I gave myself to try to write a self-portrait without understanding that like I was going to change as I got older and went through life experiences and circumstances changed. I have a very different life now than I did then. And so like if let's say I never had written a Strange Loop then and I was going to start writing a Strange Loop now, it would be a totally different story in a lot of ways because my life is different,
Of course, and all of us are different as we get older.
Right.
Makes complete sense. Um, I loved the original Broadway production because the entire cast was queer identifying. Is that
Mhm.
something that is part of what you want all productions to embrace?
So, it's really interesting because I just saw a production in Boston, which was the first regional production of it that wasn't affiliated with like the Broadway production. And everyone in the production identified as Black, but there was one cast member who is sort of identified as Black, but like I can't believe he was like Puerto Rican or something. And it was really interesting to me because I suddenly had this moment where I was like, oh, I mean, and I guess and everybody was in that production was queer. Not everybody in this production in San Francisco is, but and not everybody in the production in London was queer either. So, but it was like they all rose to the task of the character of the spirit of the piece. And so I'm sort of really excited about as it continues to be produced for companies to decide for themselves sort of what the spirit of the piece is and how they're gonna do that and who are the people who they're gonna task with honoring the spirit of the piece. So I'm not gonna say that like I want there to be like an all straight a strange loop or anything like that. But I will say that I believe in performance, I believe in acting, I believe in the material. I mean, the material really demands that you put on a show. And so I'm sort of like to some degree, I think there's more flexibility in how and who can do that. but like the material is the material. So it, I'm interested in the bounds of that, of like how far people can push it before it becomes something else.
Right, right. I think it'd be interesting to see, even a half straight cast in that,
Yeah, I mean, it's
because we
like
because
it,
we sorry to interrupt, but we live in a world where there are all these arguments about whether lived-in experiences are necessary for actors to do what they do. And, I understand that it is important, but I also believe that we also have to let actors do what actors do.
and also the other piece of it is that in A Strange Loop, there are characters who are straight. So, I mean, but it just so happens that everyone's playing, or all the thoughts are playing multi, multivalent parts. So, and also queer has multiple meanings. So I just think that's something that sort of my eyes have been open to as I've seen some people who had done these productions who are either not uh queer in the ways that we understand that to mean, or who are not straight, or who are not male, who are not like gay. Like there's a queer is queer is a contains multitudes. Let's put it that way.
It absolutely does. Now, you went on as Usher for three performances in January of 2023, so that you didn't have to cancel three performances. And I'm
Mhm.
wondering what your perspective was being on stage, watching a Broadway house, particularly when it got to the point where you're doing AIDS as God's punishment.
It was a really profound and powerful three performances for me because I went from having lived a life that I drew from in order to write this piece to having to then perform the piece and direct that energy outward. And so I'm like sort of the only person in the history of A Strange Loop who has looked at clouds from both sides now. Like I've seen it from both vantage points and I felt the loop in both directions. And I feel very blessed to have had that opportunity to do that. And so, I mean, and getting to AIDS God's Punishment, that song has so many meanings to me, in part because of what inspired it and uh the writing of it and things that happened in my life that then influenced the writing of it, that I just was I it was an honor for me to step inside of that and get to sort of literally embody it for those performances.
I don't know what your perspective was on stage, but I know sitting in the audience when we were encouraged to clap along, I just said, "Oh, no, 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 there is no way I'm clapping along to this." So I'm wondering if you see people with hesitation, if you see people, if there's a divide, people who are
Oh
instantly
yeah.
to follow what that must look like being on stage.
It's my favorite part. My favorite part of A Strange Loop is the moment when everyone has to decide what their relationship to the gospel play is. Some people, I clap every single time. And I've never, every time I see the show, I clap. It is my honor to clap. I love it. Some people start and they stop. Some people never start. Some people look around and are angry at other people who are clapping. Some people are confused. But that all of those responses are literally what Usher wants. He wants that's what it feels like to be him, is to see to have these conflicted emotions in this sort of musical um fantasia, in this sort of hate filled but like beautifully underscored, beautifully sung gospel moment. That's what it feels like inside of him, and he is directing that outward, so that people can experience it, because he's been showing you his impression of it the whole time. But until you're in it, you'll never know. That's one of my favorite Joni Mitchell lyrics. People can tell you where they've gone, they can tell you where to go, but till you get there yourself, you'll never really know. He puts you right inside of him. That you wanted a gospel play, right? That's what he says to his mother, but he's also talking to the audience.
Yeah, it's mission accomplished, certainly.
Right.
Um, Last February for Black History Month, Playbill put together a list of the most important events in Black theater on Broadway. And Strange Loop was obviously on that list. And following that was the entirety of the 2021-2022 season, where there were 9 plays by Black playwrights that opened. Unfortunately, not in spite of great reviews, most of them didn't have a really healthy run. Do you feel that there was too much pressure in that one season for Black playwrights to prove that they are viable on Broadway?
Well, I think that we have to really look at the whole picture, which is that every season on Broadway, most things don't make it. So it just, but in the last couple of years, there's been a great push to put a lot of Black shows on Broadway or shows helmed by Black writers. I mean, that's also another thing. It's like, what is it? What defines a Black show? Is it the writers? Is it the actors? Like, who is it the composer? Does it have to be the composer and the book writer? Does it like what actually makes it a Black show? That's one thing. But so, but whatever, regardless of that, all of it's being fed to Broadway, which is a totally capitalist marketplace that's about real estate and selling tickets. So if something makes it or doesn't make it, what is I don't know. I don't I think that like it's you can't fully attribute anything to whether it's Black or not, you know. So I don't totally know the answer, but I also question the question, if that makes any sense.
It does. I just get concerned because I know, because you stated it so nicely there that this is about capitalism and real estate.
Hmm.
I just hope that post George Floyd, that we're not looking at a bunch of people who are saying, all right, here's our immediate reaction, and if it doesn't work, well, then at least we tried, and the opportunities aren't going to still be there.
Well, I think that it remains to be seen. But like, look at the current season. Look at how many shows are on Broadway. All you have to do is go and look at the box office, and you'll see who's doing well and who's not doing well. Um, and the I think producers, having worked very closely with the producers I've worked with on the shows I've worked with, it's never been my experience that producers are not doing everything that they can to make their shows run. But there are real economic realities that every show, it does not matter what the race of it is, have to deal with. And so I guess, let's say the producers were the worst faith of all and said, okay, fine, no more Black shows. That's not going to change the economic realities that they have to deal with. It's still going to be what's your overhead and what's your ticket, like what's your capitalization and uh what's your ticket sales, and like, and do you break even? Are you making a profit or not? How expensive is it to do the show? Like, these are the things that I wish that we talked about a little bit more rigorously, and sort of with more candor, because it's just true. Like, I've been through it. Like, it doesn't, like, a show can be as critically praised as you want, but you still, it doesn't change your weekly overhead. So,
Yes, I agree. It's still a business after all.
right. And that's like the cold, hard truth of it. And so then it becomes a question of like, well, does everything need to be on Broadway? Or maybe it's worth it to put something on Broadway that will close. There's so many things to consider, and you never know what's going to happen. Like, I remember there's a show that went on Broadway many, many years ago that was it was about porn stars, and it had like Cheyenne Jackson and Henry Winkler, and then Hurricane Sandy came, and then they closed. It was like that simple. Do you know what I mean? Like there's so many things that happen. Uh, and I think race is only one small piece of it.
I just wish it were, you know, one small they shows got judged based on their merit and not trying to look like you're doing the right thing. That's, you know,
Yeah.
because I question the motive. That's all. I
I
question
mean, I sometimes think that I mean, I think it's also possible that some shows are not served by going to Broadway. Like literally, but because there's a push of we want there to be more diversity. So therefore we have to put something in an unnatural position as opposed to maybe thinking well, outside the box. Maybe there's a better economic model that will serve that piece. Or you know what I mean? Like they're just I just again, having been behind the scenes on this, I just have such a different perspective that's not just about Broadway or bust.
right. There's a lyric in Tyler Perry Writes Real Life. I'm into entertainment that is undercover art. How much does that ideal guide you, whether you were creating A Strange Loop or White Girls in Danger or Teeth?
White Girl in Danger.
White Girl, sorry.
Uh,
Well, I think there are a lot of white girls in danger, so maybe I was just concerned for more than the one in your show.
right. Well, there's more than one in my show, but she's singular. They're all singular. They only think of themselves. Um, uh, I'm always pushing for entertainment that's undercover art. That's the work that I've always liked the best, and that's what inspired me, and that I look to as my sort of guiding star and my guiding light and my guiding star as I was honing my craft and learning how to make the work I wanted to make. Um, I that but that work is not always going to win the box office. So it's always a kind of a balance.
Well, it's also about how much do you want to express yourself in a way that is organic and natural to you, as opposed to trying to placate, you know, logarithms or algorithms or, you know, any other formulas that some people think are the way to make art work.
Yeah, I mean, and I think about this all the time. I've been talking to a friend of mine over the last couple of months about the notion of selling out and how young people, I think, actually don't know what that term even means anymore because their whole lives are conditioned around they're not when they think of like being an artist or being a performer, like they're not like they're they often think of themselves sort of as just sort of content creators and that like and so selling out is the point. Like the point is to get as much money as possible. It's not, oh, I'm going to honor this sort of principle that I have around my art, my artistry, no matter what. Um, and so I'm often thinking about that, about how I I don't want to sell out. I want to honor my artistry. I want the thing that I do to be the thing that I can, if I'm going to put it in the marketplace, that's what I'm putting in the marketplace, come hell or high water. Um, but it's getting a lot harder. The economics of theater are like so difficult, and so I'm often wondering, what do I do? What do I do? Because I don't. It's not really in me to sell out because I also had spent so many years perfecting the thing that I do that I don't just have this other instinct in my back pocket. It doesn't come naturally to me. So I'm always kind of like, well, then I guess that means I have to continue to push my little Sisyphean boulder up the hill and see if I can get it to the top or if it will crush me on the way down.
Well, it's interesting that you brought up the idea of content creation because I saw the tweet that you posted on April 8th in relation to Jared Carmichael's reality show. And you and you wrote every act of content creation is an act of content destruction. Stop wasting our time. We have less of it to spend than we think.
I was
Content,
not in a good mood that day.
that's all right. But I love the idea that every act of content creation is an act of content destruction.
Right. I mean, I I'm sorry, I have a Joni Mitchell quote for everything.
All right,
And
just so people who don't know, Joni Mitchell is one of the three female singer-songwriters that resonate most with you.
yeah,
Liz Fair, and Tori Amos being the other two.
that's right. And Joni has this lyric on her song, her 1972 song, Electricity, that goes, I'm out of touch with the breakdown of this century. And that's sort of how I feel in the content era. Like there's just so like we're everybody's on their phone. There's a meme for every emotion that you could possibly feel or not feel. Um, there's this constant pressure to broadcast every aspect of your life. I have been very guilty of this, so I'm not at all above it. But like, and that's sort of how I felt watching the Gerard Carmichael reality thing. Whereas I felt a lot of empathy for him in the first special, and then I was like, oh, I think I'd like to be friends with him. And then I started watching the next one. I was like, oh, fuck that guy. Like, I mean, this is not fair. I mean, I've met him once very briefly, and who knows? Like, maybe I'm just not being generous enough. But just watching that, I was like, why is there a camera in everybody's face for it in order to like ostensibly do this vulnerable thing? Like, I just something about it feels very Hollywood to me, and not like the real thing of like why are you doing this? Like what do you hope to gain from this? I don't know. Like maybe I need to watch the rest of it, but it puts such those two episodes I saw just put such a bad taste in my mouth. Um and so I responded.
Well, I thought it was but I thought the idea,
Yeah, I mean I do
regardless,
think that. Like
yeah.
it's just everything about our lives is so disposable. And I just hate that. Like I never used to feel like that growing up when I was reading books or watching movies or TV. I never thought that everything was so disposable. But maybe it is. But I'm resistant to that. Like I want and the art that I tried to make and that I try to make, I want it to last. I want it to mean something to people and to be something that you can go back to and that it can like resonate with you beyond just the moment that you watch a 2 second clip of it online or a meme. Like I don't want to be a meme. I want to last. I want my work to last. I mean, that might be hubris or naive or whatever, but like that's what I've been trying that's what I for good or for ill, that's what I've been trying to do all these years.
Well, and apropos of that, I don't understand not just why we have cameras in everybody's faces, but why we always have cameras in our hands.
That's what I'm saying. Like
Why can't we just live in the moment and experience the
and
moment and
that's
hold
and I
that
think
here?
that's so I'm sorry. And that's like part of what I was frustrated by watching that documentary or series or whatever is like I like at the end of it, wouldn't it be amazing at the end of it he was like, I need to turn this camera off, or I need to put this phone down, or I need to like you know like if there was some epiphany or like insight that comes out of this constant need to be seen and to be seen being seen.
Fair enough. Well, let me conclude our time, Michael, by asking you about something Langston Hughes is quoted as saying. He said, perhaps the mission of an artist is to interpret beauty to people, the beauty within themselves. How has the totality of the experience of Strange Loop afforded you to accept that you have interpreted your own beauty vis-a-vis this show? And how will that inspire you moving forward?
It's been a real loop the loop roller coaster ride for me because sometimes like sometimes I would feel like wow, like what a cool thing I've made that has shown, as you say, beauty to the world, you know. But then other times I felt like, oh God, I've made something that's just a vehicle for narcissism and navel gazing. And but then I come back to, no, I made something that is a real vehicle for a lot of Black actors to come together to tell a story of a person trying to find themselves and somewhat succeeding. And that to me feels like a win. Um, and so I can only hope that that continued uh there's a will to continue to tell that story and to find artists who want to tell that story as difficult as it is to tell.